Here's an unpopular stance that I cannot be dissuaded from. Oob is black. Now, before I go in to explain my stance, let me start by saying this. Feel free to disagree, but I will not be convinced otherwise. So, why is Oob black, you say? First, let me start by addressing the claims that make people say he's not black, or at least the things I've heard online. The two biggest reasons I've heard given from people who don't believe Oob is black is, one, they believe he's some form of Indian, or two, they'll point out that he doesn't have stereotypical animated black caricature lips. Here's the thing, I'm not even here to tell those people that they're quote unquote wrong. I'm just here to say two can play that game. So let's break it down to the basics. For the most part, there have been a lot of different racial representations in Dragon Ball, right? Like we've seen white people, black people, Indian people, Native American people, right? As represented by characters, for example, like Bora and Upa, they represent like Native American Indians. Characters like Nam, who represent the Indians of the country of India. And of course, all manner of different alien races. Then there are characters like Oob, who are more or less racially ambiguous, but I'm gonna assert that he's black. Take characters like Bora and Upa, for example, who live in typical Native American structures like teepees, and they have the headdresses and feathers. They're clearly inspired by Native Americans. People like Nam, who wear a certain type of garment, and they have the dot on their forehead. He's meant to represent like Indians of India. And for probably my least favorite example, we'll use Killer from Dragon Ball Z and the Buu Saga, who is dark pigmented and has stereotypically black caricature lips. Cool. Not really. Oob is somehow a hodgepodge of most of these things. For example, if he were Indian, he would be closer to appearance to somebody like Nam, but he's darker pigmented than Nam, and he has a broader nose than Nam. Nam is animated with a more narrow nose and features that are closely more representative of actual Indians, whereas Oob has a broad African nose. Also, Nam speaks with a pretty pronounced Indian accent, along with the other members of his village when they're shown in OG Dragon Ball. Oob isn't shown to have such an accent. Oob also doesn't have the red dot on his forehead either. So that's enough for me to conclude that he's definitely not Indian. Now, while it's true that Oob doesn't have those stereotypical black caricature lips, he wouldn't be the only black person in Dragon Ball to not have that feature. I was actually watching the Red Ribbon Saga a couple of days ago, and I'll try to find the steal from it and use it in this video to illustrate the point that there were a few other black people throughout Dragon Ball who didn't have lips animated in that way. Not a whole lot, but enough to justify my point. Then they might use something like Uber's attire to compare it to Nam and say, well, Nam comes from a village and he wears Indian attire, and it's stated that Oob also comes from a village. But you know what other continent has countries that have villages? Africa. So Oober's attire was never really inherently Indian. It was just meant to represent him coming from a very poor environment. And lastly, his hair. Now it's true, Oob doesn't have typical kinky black hair. His mohawk is animated in a way that would imply it's straighter hair, kind of like the Saiyans and just all the other non-black people in the universe. However, there actually are countries in Africa where it is pretty common to have straighter hair versus coarser, curlier hair, like Ethiopia and Somalia and places of that region. So given Oob's complexion, broad nose, East African hair texture, and his village attire, me personally, I'm of the mindset that Oob is black. And what's wrong with Oob being black? Like honestly, with all the green people and other pigmented people, what would be so wrong with Oob being black? Now, the intention of this video isn't to persuade people to adopt my view on the situation. I'm just telling you how I view it, and also how I cannot and will not ever be talked out of that point of view. But I still want to know what you guys think. So leave a comment and tell me what do you think about Oob's ethnic identity. Do you think he's Indian? You think he's black? You think he's something else in between? Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to share this video and follow for more content from the legendary Black Saiyan.